Hi everyone, welcome to the December 1st edition of the TimeformUS Pacecast. I'm David Aragona here with my usual co-host Craig Milkowski, recording one day later than usual this week. I was feeling a little bit under the weather yesterday, so took a day off, but we're back on track today and wanted to get this episode out because this past weekend, Thanksgiving weekend, really featured a ton of graded stakes racing. It's one of the last major stakes weekend of the year, traditionally this weekend, then Cigar Mile week, and then really no major graded stakes until the end of the year when you have that Malibu before the new year. But Craig, we saw some really nice performances the past week at Churchill, Downs, Del Mar, Aqueduct, a lot to get through, and some horses that I think are finishing their careers on the right note.
Yeah, there were some really good performances highlighted by Maxfield, of course, who I'm sure we're going to get to here in a minute. And sad to see some of these horses go, but that's just the way that our game works. As you say, a ton of good racing. I did put out all of the speed figures from last week, which was a ton because the stakes racing dated all the way back to Monday, I believe. So on Twitter, you can find those to kind of follow along. And yeah, just a lot of good racing and looking forward to talking about these.
Yeah, I was reading a lot of the reporting this morning about where these horses are going next. A lot of the ones that we will talk about that won this past weekend are being retired at the end of their careers, but some horses that might be targeting bigger things next year over the winter, so we'll try to talk about that as we go through. But as Craig said, let's start things off with the Clark, the feature race at Churchill Downs from last Friday, that Grade 1 event, won by Maxfield. Craig, this was supposed to be the big showdown with the 3-year-old Midnight Bourbon. I thought both of these horses got great trips. Maxfield just came out on top here. He's never lost the Churchill Downs. He got the right setup and just was superior to Midnight Bourbon on the day.
Yeah, and I think what really made a big difference was the ride that Jose Ortiz gave. He put Maxfield right up there, close to the pace. He didn't let Midnight Bourbon get away. That one didn't seem to be himself to me. I'm curious what you think, but he just never really looked comfortable right from the start, even coming out of the gate. So I'm not sure he ran his A race on this day, but take nothing away from Maxfield. He showed up. He ran a big race. It was actually his best TimeformUS speed figure ever, a 126, which isn't a big surprise. I mean, he's about to reach full maturity. So I would imagine he'd even run a little bit faster if he had been slated to come back next year, which he's not. But really cool horse. He did not really live up to it in some of his races. He just ran into better foes. But the one thing you could say about him is he always showed up and ran his race.
Yeah, he did. He never turned into poor effort. He probably, as you said, never reached the potential that some people were hoping early in his career when he won that string of races. He had all those stops and starts. He did put together a full campaign this year. Just, he didn't run in the Breeders' Cup. He just never got to that point that I think a lot of people expected him to. But he goes out with a winning performance here. As you said, it did help that Midnight Bourbon probably didn't show up with his A effort. I'm not really sure what the story was there. He got what seemed like a perfect trip for him. The pace wasn't that fast, and he was controlling things on the front end. It's not like Maxfield applied that much pressure until they got to the far turn, but he just folded in the stretch, and actually it was Happy Saver, the other Todd Pletcher runner, who came from slightly off the pace to issue a challenge to Maxfield late, and I don't want to give too much credit for just beating Happy Saver, who himself is probably a horse that never really fully delivered on the potential that he showed early on. But both of these horses delivered solid efforts. I wonder if the result would have been different if Happy Saver had ever switched over to his right lead in the stretch. He just kind of hung on that wrong lead for the entire stretch drive, which is not something we had really seen from him in the past. But these two did slug it out to the wire, and they clearly were the two best horses on the day. Let's move on to the other graded stakes from a little bit earlier in the week at Churchill Downs, the Grade 2 Falls City. This one for the fillies and mares, kind of the female counterpart to the Clark. And it was won for the second straight year by Ken Mix-Peak's En Boutant, a horse that just seems to always show up, not only in this race, but when she gets to Churchill Downs, she really seems to run her best races in Louisville. And it's actually the second straight year that she's winning the Falls City by exactly 6 lengths.
Yeah, this was a really nice effort from her. She won it with a 118 TimeformUS speed figure, so got back to some of her better efforts. The final time was even a 120, and that kind of indicates what happened, in my opinion. She was challenged a little bit early by Army Wife, but when you look at the pace figures, she wasn't really being challenged. They were just kind of running next to each other through very moderate fractions, and That said, her main rival had to be Bonnie South in here, and she's never going to run her best race when she doesn't get much pace. She needs it. Didn't get it here, and that's the advantage of having that tactical speed like a horse like Envoûtant does.
Yeah, they made Bonnie South the favorite here, I guess, due to the fact that she had beaten Envoûtant in their prior meeting behind Latruska. But Bonnie South, she's just kind of turning into one of these horses that even when she runs well, it just seems like she never wins. When she does get the victory, like she did in that race at Keeneland earlier in the year, it's like she was trying to lose, but she still got it done. She's just a horse that seems to want to settle for the minor awards. And Envoûtant, like I was saying, at Churchill Downs, it just seems like she brings her A efforts every time she gets over that surface, and she clearly did not mind the sloppy track here, just riding the rail to victory. I saw Ken McPeak saying that we might see her a couple more times. She's slated to be bred to Gun Runner early next year, but they said they might run her while she's in foal a couple times, maybe through to the Apple Blossom. They'll see how things develop with that. But she's never been at the top of this division, but she's put in some nice performances like this on a number of occasions.
Yeah, for sure. I was scrolling through while you were talking. She had actually run a 122 in one of her races. It was just a minor race at Churchill, the Shawnee. But it's not like she hasn't shown this kind of talent before. Just a really solid race mare, and one that I would imagine would be one to follow as a dam.
Moving on to Saturday at Churchill Downs, they ran their Stars of Tomorrow card with those two big graded stakes for the 2-year-olds, the Kentucky Jockey Club and the Goldenrod. The Kentucky Jockey Club for the Colts and Geldings got the faster speed figure here as Smile Happy kept his record at 2 for 2. He's still undefeated after those pair of starts, and he's been pretty impressive both times, Craig. He turned some heads when he won his debut at Churchill a little bit earlier in the year, and this race, he got a wide trip. He was about 4 wide early, 4 wide around the far turn, moved up to Challenge Classic Causeway in the stretch, went right on past that foe, and kind of given the muddled state of the 2-year-old picture at the end of this year, he's got to be in the conversation as one of the most exciting horses heading in to their 3-year-old seasons next year.
Yeah, no doubt about it. He got a really nice 108 speed figure, which is real solid for a 2-year-old this time of year. I find him just a really interesting horse because he's by run happy, and you wouldn't expect him to be able to be a 2-turn type horse. Obviously, he gets that from the dam side of his pedigree. But Ken McPeak knew what he was doing. He debuted him at 1 1/16 at Keeneland, skipped right past the sprints. He was super impressive that day. And I would say this one, even though the speed figure only improved 6 points, was much more impressive due to the trip that he had. The first time he kind of got a really good setup with a very fast pace, where in this race, there wasn't a lot of pace on at all. It was just kind of moderate, and he was able to sit wide and swoop by them all. So I was impressed.
Yeah, as was I. I mean, that 111 final time figure is really good for this time of year for a 2-year-old. It's not like we saw the horses in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile running that much faster. And he seems like one that's not going to mind some extra distance. I know he's by run happy, but we've seen some of the run happies, the progeny of him, able to go 2 turns, longer distances. I think winning up to 1.25 miles, one of his progeny did. So it's not like he's a sire of pure speed. And as you said, the dam being by Pleasant Tap, there's not a whole lot of pedigree of quality on the dam side, really not a whole lot of runners at all in this female family, but definitely a horse that seems like he's been relishing the added distance for Ken McPeak as a 2-year-old, so an exciting prospect moving into next year. Craig, I wasn't sure why they were so intent on rating Classic Causeway in this race. He's a horse that had shown so much speed in his first couple of starts and seemed like they came out of the gate this time with a plan to take him back off the pace. He ran okay. I wonder if maybe he just hasn't gotten back to that debut performance, but maybe he's one that still has a better effort in him. I just feel like they've got some things to figure out with this horse.
Yeah, my thoughts with him were the last race was just kind of a real head scratcher. He didn't do any running. And the horse that came to mind for me was Tis the Law, where he kind of ran a race similar when he showed up, I think it was at Churchill, and it just didn't run very well, but he rebounded and ran a big race the next time. So I was kind of looking for the same from here, but we really didn't get it. I mean, he definitely ran better than last time when he was third in that Breeders' Futurity at Keeneland, but still a little bit disappointing to me. I mean, I don't think he ever looked like a winner.
yeah, maybe ultimately he's just going to be a one-turn horse. I think he's one that we might want to give another shot to. We'll see what they do next year. But Smile Happy, definitely the exciting prospect coming out of this race. Craig, we didn't see the filly version of this race, the Goldenrod, go quite as fast. It did feature a faster early pace, and I think that made both Ugiri and Sandstone a little bit vulnerable to the eventual winner, Dreamlith, who got the job done at 9-1. Dreamlith had struggled in a couple of Grade 1 races immediately after breaking her maiden, but she always seemed like the kind of horse that was going to relish added ground, and she was just able to wear down those two in the stretch.
Yeah, it was one, as you say, the pace was definitely a little bit quicker. Ujiri held on pretty well for second, actually got a little bit better speed figure than the winner with a 104. Dreamlith got a 103. Not sure what to make of this. I don't think it was as impressive as the males, not just because of the clock, but it just doesn't read up with some of the other 2-year-old fillies that we've seen already this year, like Smile Happy did.
Yeah, Sandstone had taken all the money in this race off that 11th leg victory in her prior start at Churchill Downs, but that came at the expense of just 3 rivals. I think there was some question about the overall quality of that field, and while the two coming out of that race did finish second and third here in reverse order, I think it's interesting that a horse like Dreamlith, who was coming out of losses to Echo Zulu and Juju's Map, was able to beat them, and I would say that does bolster the form of those horses that finished in the money in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile fillies, especially Echo Zulu, who is going to be she's the presumptive champion in that division, but also Juju's Map, who was so dominant winning the Alcibiades and didn't get the right trip maybe in the Breeders' Cup. She's one that I would be excited about next year, and I think Dreamlith flatters the form of that Alcibiades. Let's move on to another 2-year-old race from that Saturday card at Churchill Downs, actually the final race of the day, the Fern Creek. And Craig, this drew a pretty nice field for 2-year-olds going 6 furlongs. All of the horses that completed the trifecta here, the winner, Marissa's Lady, as well as Matarea and Sweet Dandy Girl, they had all shown ability in prior starts, but Marissa's Lady, I mean, she set a fast pace on the front end and she just kept finding more.
Yeah, I thought this was a really nice effort. It was a good ride by Rafael Bejarano. Got a good 105 TimeformUS speed figure, a nice jump over her debut 94, and just a really solid effort. I don't know what the future holds as far as her for distance, but she's certainly going to be a good sprinter. I do think that the ride might have made a little difference. I think Joel Rosario got himself a little bottled up and just wasn't able to ever get that run until it was too late. So I would probably give Materia, I think that's how you say it, another chance, Matarea maybe, but I thought she ran pretty well on the turn back as well.
Yeah, I don't disagree about that. She definitely lost a little bit of momentum in upper stretch, but I was still impressed by Marissa's Lady, just kind of turning back all the challenges. It looked like Monterey was going to go by her. Maybe at the 16th pole, it seemed like that one was building up some momentum, but Marissa's Lady just seemed to find a little bit more in the last 16th to hold her off. So I like the tenacity that she showed, because she also showed that same characteristic in her debut when she battled to get the lead at the wire to win by a head. So seems like a pretty promising sword for trainer William Morey, and I think all of the top 3 in this race are pretty good, because even Sweet Danny Girl, who was third, she had won her first couple starts like a good thing, and she settled for third here, but I don't think she really lost anything in defeat. So I'll be following this race to see how these 3 do in their subsequent starts.
Yeah, and it's interesting to note, Marissa's Lady, it's not like she's a need to lead or has to be up front, because her debut, she actually tracked a pretty moderate pace and really closed well into it.
One more horse that I do want to mention from that Saturday card at Churchill Downs was from a maiden race earlier in the day, the 4th race on the card, going 7 furlongs. Another good 2-year-old for trader Ken McPeak, as he sent out Cocktail Moments to win her debut. This one didn't take any money. She went off at 26-1, but I mean, she won like she should have been the heavy favorite, because she was far back early and she did get some pace to close into, but she made quite the impressive run around the far turn and she just drew off through the stretch like there was no stopping her.
Yeah, it should be noted, Ken McPeak had quite a day. He had won the prior race at a big price. He won this one. He went on to win one of the stakes races later that we already talked about. So, yeah, it was a big day for him. She got a 104 TimeformUS speed figure for the win. And, well, like you said, I mean, she did get a nice pace set up. We have the fractions in red, but she won by 9 lengths. I don't think at the end of the day the pace was going to matter a whole lot to the result. She was always going to be the best horse racehorse in this field. So he's got a lot of promising 2-year-olds, and definitely is going to be one to watch this year.
Yeah, it's not very common that you see a horse who doesn't even have the lead at the stretch call end up winning by nearly 10 lengths, but that was the case with Cocktail Moments, as the race did kind of fall apart behind her a little bit. But, I mean, the horse that was setting the pace did hold on for second here, and Cocktail Moments just absolutely destroyed this field. We'll see what kind of horse she turns out to be. She's by Uncle Mo. The Dam was actually a very good synthetic sprinter. I think she won the Best Arabian up at Woodbine, so we'll see how far this horse wants to go. I think it's unclear if she's a closing sprinter or one that wants to go farther, but the fact that Ken McPeak did debut her going 7 furlongs says that maybe she's trained like a horse that can get some more distance, but definitely an exciting prospect. She earned, I believe, the same speed figure that Dreamlift got, or actually 1 point higher for winning the Goldenrod, so a horse that definitely has some potential moving forward. And Craig, one more race to discuss from Churchill Downs last week, actually going back to that Friday card on Clark Day, an allowance race that we actually handicapped on the forecast last week, won by Injunction. This is a horse that I know you liked quite a bit. He went off at 7-1. They bet Milliken down to 2-5, and Injunction actually was the horse that won. Like, he was the odds-on favorite because he took the early lead, never relinquished it, and won eased up in the end by many lengths.
Yeah, though I personally didn't hit the pick 4. I can't speak for you because I didn't use Maxfield. I really did like Injunction. I think we gave out some pretty good ideas on that day, and he was one of them. He had run a speed figure actually faster than what Milliken had last time out when he had a 1:14 for his win at Ellis Park. And while I would have said that Milliken was probably the most likely winner, I thought it was pretty close between these two. And at the end of the day, it turned out it wasn't all that close at all. Milliken just ran away from him, got a really nice 1:18 Timeform US speed figure. And I'm not sure where they're going to head with this guy, but he's got some talent for sure.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, he did get away with a pretty moderate opening quarter. Nobody really challenged him too hard for the early lead. But after that, he just kind of kept ratcheting up the pressure on the front end. And Milliken was off the bridle by the time they got to the quarter pole. And you could just see Joel Rosario had never asked this horse for his best. And he just kind of barely shook the reins at him in the stretch. And he won opening up by 5 lengths here. I mean, we'll see how far he wants to go, what kind of horse he ultimately turns out to be. But in just his 4th career start, getting a 1:18 Timeform US speed figure, very impressive. You don't see many horses from the Skip Away sire line turning out to be very good. This one, a son of Skip Shot, but he's definitely a horse with some real talent. So we'll see what he does, as they are likely to move up into stakes company sometime soon. Move on to Del Mar, where there are a bunch of graded stakes that we have to talk about, mostly on the turf. Let's begin with the Grade 1 race from their Sunday card that went as the feature. That was the Matriarch. Craig, this was probably not the toughest edition of the Matriarch that we've seen. Usually this race comes up pretty deep and competitive. That was not really the case this year, with just 6 runners signed on, and I would say it got even less interesting given the tactics that the Connections decided to employ when they got out of the starting gate, because, I mean, I think Chad Brown was the only one that maybe looked at the TimeformUS pace projector or just read the racing form, because he sensed that the race was there for the taking for anybody that showed a modicum of early speed, and that's what Regal Glory did, and they couldn't catch her.
Yeah, this race was over probably a quarter mile in when Regal Glory was 2 on top. And the first quarter mile pace figure was a lowly 68. This is a race we had to do the pace upgrade. When you look in TimeformUS PPs, it's going to have a P next to the race rating, telling you that this race got an upgrade. There was simply no way to rate it. The pace was so slow, and I'm not sure what the other Connections were thinking. I don't know how much, who could have used their speed in here more than they did, but somebody should have, because this race turned into a procession. It didn't look all that great on paper, and it was even worse to watch.
Well, I mean, I think this is a classic scenario where Connections of the horse who should have been on the lead made a real tactical error here. I mean, you saw some of the quotes ahead of the race, Mike Stidham saying that, oh, well, we sent Princess Grace to the lead last time and she lost, so we've got to change up the tactics here. But I don't understand why Connections will look to the pace scenario of the previous race to make their pace strategy for the race that's taking place today, when it has a completely different scenario than the prior race. Because if you look in the TimeformUS charts, Princess Grace got a 133 pace figure for the opening quarter in the Goldakova last time, and she did lose. But I mean, she was not going to have to run a 133 pace figure to make the lead going the same distance into this matriarch. And for whatever reason, the connections decided to just rip her off the pace at the start. And I mean, when you do that in a race where nobody's showing speed, there is the potential for you to get shuffled all the way back. And that's what happened. She ended up last year. I'm sure that wasn't the plan for her to be last of 6. But I mean, when you don't show any speed coming out of the gate and you make the decision to rate when you're the speed, I mean, bad things are going to happen, and it's just unfortunate. I didn't like Princess Grace in this race anyway. I think Regal Glory was probably the best horse regardless, but the connections gave her no chance by making that decision.
Yeah, I would agree. This was a race we had labeled as having no speed in the TimeformUS Pace Projector. So hopefully somebody used it. That somebody would obviously be Chad Brown. I have no idea if he does or not, but he clearly made that decision. I mean, Regal Glory is a horse who has been able to run close to the front and run well. So why not? And it was certainly the way to go here. So good effort from her. I'm not sure how much I would put into this race when handicapping in the future. The speed figures lined up perfectly when we made the pace adjustment, but I personally would look at other races.
Another race in which pace had a major impact was the other Grade 1 at Del Mar this past week, the Hollywood Derby, the final race on their Saturday card. And a bit of an upset here, Craig, is Beyond Brilliant was able to get to the front end under Kenta Sormo and just barely hold on to take them all the way. This horse went off at only 10-1. He was not one of the major players coming into this race, having never won a stakes before in this Grade 1 affair, but he just got the right trip in a race where a lot of the major players and major rivals to Beyond Brilliant just found themselves with too much to do coming into the stretch.
Yeah, and to be fair, it was a really good ride by, I believe it was Kenta Sormo. This horse had shown plenty of talent. He had run speed figures just as good, and actually his last speed figure was better than the favorite, I think, who was Public Sector right there. And it was a good tactical race. I wouldn't say I think Beyond Brilliant's the best horse in the race. I think that would go to the runner-up, who was just, to my eye, really impressive from the 14 post. That would be Santine. He was able to just had a wide journey all the way and still looked like he might get there late. So if I had to take one horse coming out of here, it would be him. But no knock on Beyond Brilliant. The rider took advantage of that good tactical speed.
Yeah, I know we're both high on the runner-up Santine. He's a horse that we had talked about a little bit when he won that allowance race at Keeneland in his prior start. I think we kind of couldn't believe he went off at about 4-1 that day, but the connections aimed pretty high running him here, and they almost got the job done. And I think there's an argument Santine would have won this race if he had gotten a better post position, because he just had to cover way more ground than the winner around both turns. But take nothing away from Beyond Brilliant. As you said, the connections, they sensed that they could have a tactical advantage here. They sent him to the front end in a race where some others were not quite as aggressive. None of the fractions are color-coded in blue, but you can see from just the pace figure line for Beyond Brilliant, he didn't have to work that hard to get to the front end. A couple of 114 pace figures for the first two calls in a race where the final time figure was a 117. So it's not like he was that pressured on the lead, and some others just couldn't make up the ground. Public Sector, like you were alluding to, Craig, he didn't have really a dominant profile coming into this race for a horse that was bet down to 9-5 in a 14-horse field, but I also think he was never going to be effective trying to make up 4 or 5 lengths in the stretch when you've got a horse getting comfortable on the lead like Beyond Brilliant did. So just a bit too much ground for Public Sector to make up. And there were also some other disappointments in behind. I mean, it's a race that you could watch for trips. I would say that Camp Hope, the number 11 horse, one that people might have assumed would be a bit more forwardly placed. He just had nothing go right for him. Steadied early, too far back, didn't break well. He had run some big speed figures in his prior races in Kentucky, and he's one I would give another shot to. He just didn't get a chance to put forth his best effort in this spot.
Yeah, he's actually the one I bet in this race, so I will totally agree with you on the trip there. The one horse I did want to point out was Subconscious. He was a horse who, 2 back, had run as fast as the horse whose name's going to escape me that ran in the Breeders' Cup Mile, kind of the king of the milers out in Southern California. And a lot of people question the speed figure, but he's a horse who's been okay, but he's kind of shown that it was right to split those races up. You couldn't really rate him faster than the older horse stake race went on that day, and it proved to be the right decision. He's a decent horse, but certainly not a Grade 1 type at all.
Going back to Friday at Del Mar, their feature that day, also on the turf, was the Grade 2 Hollywood Turf Cup. And Craig, I'm a little bit surprised, but pleasantly surprised that Say the Word went off at 5-1 in this race. He's a horse that we had talked about in the Del Mar handicap in his prior start when he had just gotten an absolute nightmare of a trip. He probably would have won that race, but just was completely stymied in traffic through the stretch. And he's a horse that they've tried a lot of different things with. And I think if you just kind of parse through his form and really highlighted the marathon turf races when he was going 1 3/8 and 1.5 miles, he looked like basically the same kind of horse that the 4-5 favorite Rock Emperor was on speed figures. And he got back to one of his better efforts here. But the pace situation of this Hollywood Turf Cup, it definitely helped him out.
Yeah, it's kind of about time he caught a break, to be honest. He's had a few rough trips in this year, a few pace scenarios go against him, and things finally went his way, and he was able to take full advantage. Loved the closing kick here he showed. He got a 121 TimeformUS speed figure for the win. Same as Acclimate, who, man, you just got to be impressed by Acclimate. I mean, I almost never bet this horse, but he is just a true warrior. At 7 years old, he always comes out and just runs a good race. So a lot of respect for him, but a deserved win for Say the Word.
Yeah, he's just a horse that has shown up and really gotten good in the Phil D'Amato barn. And I know that they haven't always gotten these 1.5 races or 1 3/8 races to work for him from a tactical or trip standpoint, but when they do work out the right way for Say the Word, he does show up and deliver. Rock Emperor, Craig, just kind of turning back into the Rock Emperor that we had always been used to. He gave that glimmer of hope in the Turf Classic, but he found trouble in the Breeders' Cup Turf, and then here just kind of back to disappoint to get a short price.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting. A couple horses come back out of that race. But yeah, he's just kind of an enigma. When he shows up, he's really good, but most of the time he doesn't.
Other graded stakes to mention from this past week at Del Mar on Saturday was the Grade 2 Seabiscuit. And Craig, this is one where I think the ride really made the difference, as Umberto Rispoli kind of sensed that things were not heating up that much on the front end, and he did not have a big advantage on him riding Field Pass, did not have a big advantage on the favorite Sacred Life in the early going. But moving down the backstretch, he just kind of took the bull by the horns and made that big early move to take over on Field Pass, push the pace, and he didn't let up at that point. He just kept ratcheting up the pressure, and he was able to get the jump on the favorite, and it made the difference in the end.
Yeah, I'll be honest, this is a horse that I actually did bet, and when he made that move, I may have said a few words that we would have had to censor out if we said them on the show here. But then I looked at the fractions and I kind of understood what he was doing, and certainly it turned out to be the right move because he was able to hold on. All the other riders would seem to be content to just let him dawdle up on the front end, and Umar Rispoli wasn't having any parts of it. And really good effort from him. He ran a 120 TimeformUS speed figure in the win, so good effort. And sometimes the riders are smarter than I give him credit for. This was a good effort.
Yeah, I'd say Umberto did his homework here because Sacred Life, he's a horse that he does have a big late kick, but it takes him a while to wind up and reach that top speed. We saw that when he did run down Field Pass in the Knickerbocker. He was way out of it at the top of the stretch, but he finally got there at the end of that long stretch at Belmont Park. At Del Mar, they've got that much shorter stretch, and I don't think you want to let a closer get into the race to run you down over that final eighth of a mile. And I mean, Field Pass was able to build up a bit of an advantage on Sacred Life. And I've seen Umberto Rispoli do this on a number of different horses, and I like it because we often see these turf races when riders don't make the early lead or find themselves a little far back behind a slow pace. They just kind of resign themselves to getting that trip and make no moves to change the complexion of the race. But Rispoli's not afraid to do that, and I think it paid off here with Field Pass. He did get the best of a bob. I mean, it was really close at the end of this race, but I think he probably would have gotten run down if he hadn't made that early decision. Let's finish up Del Mar by talking about a couple of allowance races. Another race from a little bit earlier in that Friday card, actually the first race of the day on Friday at Del Mar, was an allowance race that was won by Red Storm Risen. And Craig, you could say, where did this come from? Because this is a horse that had shown some talent at different points in the past, but I don't think he'd ever shown this kind of talent. I mean, the 120 TimeformUS speed figure that he got here, that's the same number that Field Pass got for winning the Seabiscuit.
Yeah, it was a nice effort from him. He had actually run a good speed figure, and now that I see it, it was Mo Forza was the horse I was trying to think of earlier. But when he ran in the City of Hope, he had set the pace, and but I was a little suspect of that figure because it was a slow pace that day. He kind of got passed by the top three, didn't really do a lot of running in the lane. Kind of bounced back in an allowance, was beaten at 6-5 using different tactics, but this was a good solid effort from him, and it seems like Phil D'Amato has him going in the right direction. Out in Southern California, 120 speed figure is going to get you into stakes races for sure, so I'll be interested to see where he shows up and if they use these more forward tactics that seem to be where he does his best running.
Yeah, this is another one of these Samsung horses that has really developed since being switched over to Phil D'Amato, kind of like Say the Word. Obviously, he didn't win a graded stakes here, but, I mean, Red Storm Risen did run a graded stakes level speed figure with that 120, and it was kind of a merry-go-round race. I mean, you see the top four finishers, really none of them changed position at any point, but I remember this horse when he was in Graham Motion's barn earlier in the year. He got some perplexing rides. He was just always been a really headstrong horse, and it seemed like the connections were so intent on rating him, and even Phil D'Amato and whoever was riding him when he first got into Southern California, they were trying to rate him in his races, and he just wants to be aggressively sent to the lead, and they gave him his head here, let him rip on the front end, and he ran his best race doing that, and I think they're going to be wise to just allow him to be a front runner moving forward, because it seems like that's when he runs his best races. Let's move back to Saturday at Del Mar with one more allowance race to discuss before we move on to a different venue. That was a dirt sprint won by Took Charge. This horse, he's always been really fast. He doesn't always get the distance in his races. He typically comes into the stretch with the lead. But on this occasion, Took Charge under John Velasco was able to get away with a moderate opening quarter, and I think that allowed him to see out the distance. But we've got a nice group of older allowance horses in Southern California in these sprint races, Craig, and I think we saw another nice performance from the winner here.
Yeah, it was a good effort. As you say, he did get away with a little bit of a kind of moderate pace in here, but he wound up with a 121 TimeformUS speed figure, so really nice effort from him. I'll be interested to see where he shows up because, as you say, the sprint division's been fairly weak out in Southern California, but it seems like we're getting some new faces show up that can run.
Let's move on to Aqueduct, where we didn't see too much graded stakes racing this past week. I think just a couple of those, but a lot of stakes on both the dirt and the turf and some nice speed figures. Let's start things off with the big race on Saturday when Miles D won the Discovery over Speaker's Corner. It was really a matchup between these two coming into the race, Craig. Speaker's Corner obviously coming off a huge speed figure against Allowance Company, but stretching back out to the two turns, Miles D already proven around the two turns, and I do think that made the difference in the end. Miles D, he just wanted the distance a little bit more than Speaker's Corner.
Yeah, and Miles D have ran some really nice races. He had that good third, I think it was in the Travers, if I remember right, when he had run a nice 118 speed figure. And though he won his last race, he did it with a low speed figure, but that race just didn't really seem representative. He was ridden way out in the middle of the track most of the race, lost a ton of ground against mostly overmatched foes. So if you didn't hold that against him, I think he had pretty much the same resume as Speaker's Corner, and he had the bonus of proving he can handle two turns. And as you say, I think that was the difference. No knock on Speaker's Corner. I think maybe bettors went a little bit overboard in here, but he ran a good race. He ran a 124 speed figure, which was just a point lower than he had run in that big win last time out. So he just got beat by a horse who was a little bit better on this day.
Yeah, the top two, they're just very different kinds of horses. Speaker's Corner is really easy speed. He doesn't have to be sent coming out of the starting gate. He just hits that top gear, high cruising speed, and he's able to carry it for a good mile. Racing in the bridle, I mean, Junior Alvarado, you know he's not an aggressive rider, but he just gave this horse his head, let him gallop along on the front end. Coming to the top of the stretch, it looked like Speaker's Corner had this race won because Miles D, he's the opposite kind of horse. He comes off the bridle a long way out. You really have to ride him to get there. He's not a horse that takes you there on his own. And Manny Franco, I mean, he put this horse to a drive about the 3/8 pole, but unlike Speaker's Corner, you keep asking Miles D, and he keeps giving more. And when they got to the 8th pole, Junior finally asked Speaker's Corner, and he just didn't have more to give, even though he hadn't been set down until that point. And Miles D, I mean, he had just kept building up momentum, and he was able to get there by the time they got to the finish line. He's definitely that 1.125 mile kind of horse, where he's able to just grind away at his foes and get the job done. They're both really nice horses. And I mean, Craig, we see this Discovery year after year produce some nice speed figures, and that was definitely the case here with both of these horses getting 124s. I mean, these are both exciting horses for next year when they turn 4 years old. I mean, we're going to see a changing of the guard in the handicap division as we do every year, and there's no reason why these two can't be major players in all of the Grade 1 races next year.
Yeah, and going forward, I would probably be a little more optimistic on Speaker's Corner, and it's precisely because of the words you use for Miles D, grind. He seems like more of a grinder to me, and unfortunately in this sport, we don't get a lot of races where he's going to have that kind of, where that's actually a good style to have. So I like Speaker's Corner. Maybe he'll get better with the 2 more turns. I did, around 2 turns, again, as opposed to this being his first time, I believe. Bourbonic is a horse I did want to mention in here, our Wood Memorial winner. And the only reason I wanted to mention him because when I saw him in the PPs, I kind of went back to look at that Wood Memorial. And I was pretty astonished at only 1 win out of all the starts from all the horses. And that was the Curlin Stakes. I believe it was Dynamic 1. So we didn't like the Wood at the time. I know I'm getting a little off subject, but man, has that race proven to be a stinker.
Yeah, well, we kind of felt that at the time. I mean, it just didn't get the highest speed figure. When you've got a 72 to 1 shot winning, it often says that a lot of the horses that were expected to do well just didn't show up. I mean, I think one of the coolest things about this race, Craig, for me, and I noticed this when I was doing some handicapping of it, is, I mean, the October 11th of 2020 maiden race that Speaker's Corner won, that day he actually beat Miles D and Bourbonic, and it's just kind of cool to see the 3 horses out of the same maiden race come back a year later, and they're all running in the Discovery, and they finished 1st, 2nd, and 4th. That's just a pretty neat thing, and it makes you excited about some of these maiden races that you do see at this time of year, because they can prove to be very key races, and a year later you can have all these horses competing in stakes events. And Miles D, I mean, I saw Chad Brown saying that he might do something a little bit out of the box for him and point this horse to races like the Saudi Cup and the Dubai World Cup. Maybe the latter of those two would be more up Miles D's alley because it's going 1.25 miles. But you don't often see Chad targeting races overseas, so must mean that he thinks this one has some more upward mobility if he's talking about him being that kind of horse.
Yeah, and I noticed that same maiden race you did as well. What I found, that not only those horses, Caddo River was in that race, Greatest Honor was in that race, both of whom went on to win some pretty big races. So, yeah, those maiden races are always fun to go back. You won't find many stronger than this one, and you could go back years before you could. I mean, it was just really strong.
Yeah, and having lost the 2019 Discovery winner Performer earlier this year to, I believe, an illness, he not getting to sire any foals, that's really unfortunate. But Miles D, he's got a very similar pedigree to Performer in that they're both out of that Personal Ensign female family. I think Personal Ensign is Miles D's 3rd dam, or maybe 2nd dam, but it's all that Phipps breeding on the bottom side, even though he's not a Phipps horse, but he's by Curlin, so definitely one that's going to be an exciting sire when his career is over, and we'll see if he can accomplish some graded stakes wins next year. Let's move on, Craig, to discuss another 3-year-old from this past week at Aqueduct on a different surface, and that's going all the way back to Friday when Never Surprised won the Gio Ponte, and this horse almost broke the track record of this performance, despite the fact that the turf course was rated good. I mean, you don't often see turf horses winning by this kind of margin, but he just ran this field off their feet, and he was so impressive drawing away in the stretch. I don't know what kind of horse he's going to turn out to be next year, but he's a very exciting prospect turning 4 next year.
Yeah, and he's the kind of horse that's always going to be a factor in the race because the connections have obviously figured out. You just got to let him run. He's a horse that wants to go when the gate opens. He's able to set a quick pace and keep going. You don't want to, even when he's on the lead, you don't want to strangle him back and try to rate and slow the race down. Just let him go and make him come catch you. And in this case, they didn't even come close. He was running away from the field. Got a big 122 Timeform US speed figure. figure, and he's a horse that I really look forward to seeing run next year. He would be a really good miler, I would think.
Yeah, I think the same thing. I don't know what they're going to do with him. I'm sure the temptation's going to be there to try a race like the Pegasus Turf, which Todd Pletcher did win last year with Colonel Liam, who kind of had a similar trajectory to this horse, getting good during the winter at the end of last year. But never surprised. I agree. He just seems like a pure miler. That's really when he can make best use of his early speed. He's a horse that just needs the lead to be effective, and he can be used aggressively to run those fast miles when he employs that style. So I'm excited to see what they do next year, because we can always use some more horses with early speed in that mile division. Not a whole lot to say about the horse that finished behind him here. They just weren't in the same league as the winner, but I'm very excited about the kind of 4-year-old that Never Surprised could be. Move on to the other race from that Friday card at Aqueduct. That was the graded stakes, the Grade 3 Comely. And this race did lose a major player when Army Wife came out. She elected to run against the older horses in the Fall City on Thursday at Churchill Downs. So without that major player in here, it kind of opened things up a little bit more. And Bees and Honey was there to take a big step forward for trainer Reeve McGahey. I believe it was the first graded stakes winner for that son of Hall of Famer Shug McGahey. But Bees and Honey just seems like a horse that really relished the added ground that she got to work with in this race.
Yeah, this was a race where they kind of defaulted to the favorite Crazy Beautiful, just a name horse who has won some decent races, but has never run particularly quick, and Played Hard was bet a little bit too as the second choice in here. And similar, she's run some nice races, but nothing all that fast. And Bees and Honey was the horse who was able to actually improve, as she has in every single one of her starts on TimeformUS Speed Figure. She had worked her way up from an 83 all the way to 100 last time in that allowance race at Churchill. And for this day, she got a 113 TimeformUS Speed Figure. So a nice big jump for her, and a horse who I think's got a pretty promising figure. And actually, it was a 115 Speed Figure. So big jump. I think part of that was the distance. So I'd like to see them keep her going longer.
Yeah, we do see these progeny of Union Rags want to go the longer distances, and this filly had never gone beyond a 1-turn mile before, so stretching out to the 2-turn mile and an eighth, especially over that demanding course at Aqueduct, it just seemed like it was right up her alley. She was outside the entire way. I know some people I was talking to were saying maybe the rail wasn't the place to be at Aqueduct on Friday. It's something maybe want to go back and look at yourself to make that determination. But regardless, it just seems like she's a filly that's really improving at the right time. And like you said, it's not like the favorite Crazy Beautiful had done anything so dominant in the past that you were that afraid of her in this race. And Bees and Honey just moved forward at the right time.
Yeah, and I will note she was in for a tag too back. Admittedly, a big tag of $75,000, but she's certainly worth a lot more than that now. So I would imagine some people are regretting not putting a slip in that day.
The other graded stakes from this past week at Aqueduct was Saturday's Grade 3 Long Island, going 1.5 miles on the turf for the fillies and mares. And Christophe Clement had a really strong hand in this race, sending out 3 runners, and it was his favorite Muna Makina who got the job done, winning her 3rd in a row. I believe it was stated this will be the last race of her career, and she's had a nice U.S. campaign since they brought her over from France. She's just a really good horse, and it seems like Christophe Clement managed her so well this year, going up to win those stakes at Woodbine and coming back down here. She got a good ride from Dylan Davis to run down the long shot Candy Flower.
Yeah, I would imagine class handicappers loved her in here. She had won a Grade 2 and a Grade 1 at Woodbine, was dropping into a Grade 3, and proved that class does matter sometimes, because some others had some similar speed figures to her. Mostly it was her stablemates as the top 3 horses. You said Clement had 3. They were the top 3 betting choices, if memory serves, and she proved the best of them. Good effort from her. Her speed figure was just pretty much what she always runs. She got a 120 in here. So I would imagine that's kind of horse she is. She's more a Grade 2 type. I don't think those Woodbine races were really as good as what the grading would say, but just really well-managed horse who had a solid campaign.
Yeah, I believe she won 4 races in the U.S., and they were the 4 races that Dylan Davis was aboard her. I think he finishes his career undefeated on this horse, and I'm sure it's a special one for him because I know this was the horse that gave him his first Grade 1 victory up in Woodbine as a rider. Just nice to see a rider like that have a real connection with a horse, and I thought he gave her a really confident ride here, not getting too aggressive with her, allowing the pace to develop as it did, and making that big late run, kind of trusting in his mare to get there at the end, because it briefly looked like Candy Flower was going to steal this on the front end. I mean, she set an honest pace on the lead, and they kind of left her alone because she looked pretty inferior to this field coming into the race as the rank outsider. But Craig, we've seen Mike Maker do this many times before, get a horse from obscurity and turn them into a pretty decent turf marathoner.
Yeah, it seemed to me usually it's with males, but obviously he can do it with the females too with this 4-year-old filly. Took him a couple starts. She didn't run particularly well the first time at Belmont, but she did at Aqueduct for sure. So I would imagine we'll see her in these extended distance races going forward.
The final stakes on that Saturday card at Aqueduct was the Aqueduct Turf Sprint Championship, and that was won by the Wesley Ward-trained Arrest Me Red, a horse that was supposed to run against his stablemate Golden Pal in the Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint. I know he'd come up with a bit of an illness and had to be scratched from that race, but gets back on track here and wins his third in a row. I think now he's 3 for 3 since coming into the Wesley Ward barn. Craig, this race was changed a little bit just prior to the start when the expected other speed, Grateful Bread, reared up in the starting gate and had to be scratched, and I think that just made it all the more clear that Arrest Me Red could go right to the front and wire this field on the front end, and frankly, I'm a little surprised he wasn't the favorite here.
Yeah, it definitely is a little surprising. This horse just keeps getting good trip after good trip. I will admit some of that must be that he makes his own trips. He has that good tactical speed, but he only got a 1:16 TimeformUS speed figure for the win, so I don't think he would have done very well had he shown up in the Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint. This was much more a race to his liking. The horse that continues to befuddle me is Pulsate, who keeps running well, but they keep just insisting on taking him back off the lead, not letting him run early, and losing these narrow decisions. I would hope at some point they would want him to be a little more forwardly placed.
Yeah, I mean, I thought Pulsate had his chance here. Manny Franco gave him a good ride. He saved ground just right in behind Arrest Me Red the whole way, and he kind of had his chance in the stretch because Arrest Me Red, it's not like he was totally sealing the deal here. He was letting the other horses into the race. He wasn't exactly sprinting through that final eighth of a mile, but Pulsate, at the end of the day, I think he's got a little bit of hanging in. We've seen him not forge past that final horse a few times in the past. This is now, I think, his third second-place finish in a row, and even before that, he hasn't always had that killer instinct. But I do agree with you. They've probably squandered a few opportunities with Pulsate not being aggressive enough in the past. I mean, the one that I guess you could say was the disappointment here was Value Proposition. I just thought he was a terrible favorite in this race because there's such a big difference between horses that are able to run superior speed figures going a mile and even 7 furlongs at Belmont compared to these 6 furlong and 5.5 furlong turf sprints. The form does not necessarily translate, and I think it was a big gamble taking a horse who had never gone a true sprint before, Value Proposition, as the favorite here.
Yeah, and I like how you term that, because to me, the 7 furlongs is not a true sprint. It's much closer to a mile race than it is at 6 furlongs. So I agreed with you. I think he was a terrible favorite in here. It didn't run well at all. And yeah, I would imagine he'll get back to longer distances because he's definitely not a sprinter.
Let's finish things up on this podcast, not necessarily with one of the most notable speed figures from the past week, but just a feel-good story, something that you don't always get the fairy tale endings at the end of horses' careers, but we definitely did get that on Saturday at Woodbine with Pink Lloyd, who went out a winner in the Kennedy Road, a race that he had won before. Really, he's won, I think, all of these races in the sprint division at Woodbine many times before. And just such a cool horse, and so great to see him go out a winner at the age of 9.
Yeah, and had he known that I tried to beat him for like the 70th time in his career, he'd have probably been smiling in the winner's circle because he just seemed to do it a lot. And he's a horse who was just game as could be. He always found a way to win. even though his speed figures had kind of tailed off, and amazingly, I don't think he even went off the favorite. He was a pretty distant second choice in here. He just figured out a way to get the job done. It looked like he might have some trouble, be trapped in, but his rider was able to work his way out, get a good trip, and Pink Lloyd, once he got clear, he was always going to win the race. He only ran a 103 TimeformUS speed figure, but really doesn't matter in this case. It was definitely a feel-good story.
Yeah, he actually first ran on the Kennedy Road back in 2016, and he's won it now 3 times. He's just such a cool horse. I mean, he was a win machine for 2017, 2018, 2019. He hasn't had that killer instinct in all of his races in 2021 so far, but he has won 3 in a row to finish off his career, and just a really admirable horse. You love to see these horses that seem to know where the wire is, are just able to get the job done. He's been so well managed by his trainer Robert Tiller, and it's nice to see when connections know when it's the right time to pull the plug and let a horse go out at the top of their game, and that's what they did with Pink Lloyd. She finished his career with 29 victories and 37 starts, just shy of $2 million in earnings. Just one of those legendary regional horses that you can look back on their career past performances, just kind of be amazed.
Yeah, and you took the words right out of my mouth. Just really nice call by the trainer, because let's be honest, he's not the horse he was a couple years ago, and good for his connections to realize it was time, even coming out of a win, that he's done enough and deserves whatever the rest of a long, happy life he's probably going to have.
Well, that's it for the race recaps for this week. We'll be back in just 2 days, since we're recording this on Wednesday, to do our TimeformUS forecast. And Craig, I'd imagine we're going to be focusing on Aqueduct on Saturday. It's the Cigar Mile Day, the final Grade 1 race in New York of the year. And we'll see how the field comes up when they draw it later today, but I've seen some of the reporting of who's racing in the Cigar Mile. Code of Honor, Independence Hall, Ginobili, American Revolution, Following C. It seems like it's coming up a really strong race. So I'm looking forward to that one and that entire card at Aqueduct on Saturday.
Yeah, really looking forward to that. We get the big 2-year-olds, but the Cigar Mile is always the highlight for me. I go back to when it was the Naira Mile, and Cigar actually won the race at 8-1, and I believe it was just his second dirt start since transferring to the barn of Bill Mott. So just always a fun race for me. It's probably in my top 5 favorite races. Love races like that in the Met Mile. So looking forward to the card. And yeah, I think we can pretty much commit that that's going to be the one we handicap.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that Craig and I will be handicapping the late pick 5 sequence at Aqueduct on Saturday, so look forward to that when the TimeformUS Pacecast comes out in a couple of days on Friday. Remember that you can always catch these podcasts on DRF.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Wherever you get your podcast, just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Thanks for tuning in this week, and make sure to catch that TimeformUS forecast in a couple of days.